Today, we explore how to help your autistic child use their natural honesty more tactfully, turning their bluntness into a strength without causing social conflict. We discuss practical strategies like role playing, social scripts, and teaching perspective taking to help your child express themselves while considering others' feelings. Tune in for tips on nurturing their honesty while fostering empathy and social awareness. But before we get started, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for reminders of upcoming streams. Let's get started. Hey, Embracers!
Welcome back.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're diving into a topic that many parents of autistic children face, and that is the topic of bluntness, something I can personally relate probably a little too hard to. I'm sure, Matt, you appreciate it.
You take it to a professional level, let's say.
I'm a professional blunt.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great. Yeah, it's like I don't know. I'm thinking of like baseball, so like minor leagues and then professional. So
Am
like you're
I
a
the
pro.
major leagues?
Yeah, you're a pro. You're a pro. So we're good.
So we love our kids for their honesty, but sometimes that bluntness can be a little bit awkward or even hurtful in certain situations, right? So what we want to talk about is how do we help our autistic children maintain that great honesty while also teaching them that they need to be mindful of other people's feelings. And that's also something that I myself personally have had to continuously learn to develop as a skill in adulthood.
Right, because I think of like sometimes like the little things they say, like if you take it as it's being said to you, it might be like an insult. So if you like are singing a song and they're like, "Mommy or Daddy, you sing terrible," or like little things like
Yeah,
that, like
like
throughout
you're
the
off
day.
key.
Right, like if you're not really like ready for it, it kind of like hits you and you're like, "Oh, that was like rather like unpleasant, but like thank you for the tip." But
It's really funny sometimes, but only in certain situations.
right.
So I want to start this off by acknowledging something really important, and that is that bluntness and honesty in themselves are not actually flaws. A lot of us actually admire these traits in other people. Like, if you're looking for a relationship, what do you want in a partner? You want somebody who's going to be honest, right? So, this actually is a trait that ends up bringing a lot of clarity to people's relationships, like sincerity, honesty, loyalty. These are good things, good traits to have. The problem, though, is how that is kind of used. And with autistic children, the goal is not really to suppress that honesty. So we're not trying to get it out of them. Like, we're not trying to stop them from being honest. We're really trying to teach them how to be honest in a respectful way and harness that honesty for good, essentially. So that's something that I am like referring to as tactful honesty, because I don't really know a better way of saying it. But it's like, yes, honesty with some tact so that you're not just going in full force bluntness.
Well, it's kind of like sugarcoating a little bit of like the delivery. Like if you are supposed to tell someone like something bad, they're a terrible singer or something, instead of just coming out being like, if cats could sing, they would hate it too. Instead of just saying like I don't know, like mean things about like their like singing
That was a
ability.
weird one. Where'd that come from?
But anyway, so instead of just being like brutally honest and straightforward, like you're trying to convey the same message, like, yeah, you're not a great singer, but there has to be like a way. And that's kind of where I think it also ties into kind of the social interactions where you're able to navigate language, where you're able to kind of use phrases that are a little bit softer than you're a terrible singer. So that's where like you really, I mean, gosh, it's hard. You really have to think of like, how do you navigate conversations when you are struggling to have the conversations a little bit? And it's
Right.
kind of like, I don't know, a difficult thing to navigate overall.
Yeah, and this is a skill that with time and patience is something that will really help them in social situations because as you can imagine, if they're going around with other kids being too blunt or honest, it's not going to end well. So, the first step that I kind of recommend when it comes to helping your child navigate this bluntness from personal experience and kind of things that I have tried myself growing up is trying to teach them the difference between intent and impact. So that is something that you've heard me talk about a lot throughout the podcast, I always talk about the importance of intent or the intention behind somebody's words because I feel like that gets lost a lot of time. Um, and that's really common with autism. Like, autistic children often don't mean to hurt your feelings when they're saying something. They're not trying to say something to make you upset. Usually, it's there with the goal of being direct and honest. They're just trying to be truthful, they're trying to be genuine, and they're trying to show you exactly how they see or perceive the world. Problem is, peers, neurotypical peers, don't really think in those terms.
Right. So like if yeah, you really have to in your situation or like the one that you're proposing, you would really have to have the person that they're conveying the message to be very, very responsible in themselves, where they're told some potentially bad news that they don't want to hear about themselves, a potential like a character flaw or something. And they have to think to themselves, like, okay, this is not like an attack on me personally. They're coming from a good place. Their intent is not to hurt my feelings. Their intent is to try and make me a better person and make me aware of a current situation or something. So you're really kind of almost like trusting that that person is very responsible and rational in their thinking, being able to work through that process instead of just hearing the emotion or hearing the words and making like an emotional connection, basically saying, this person is saying something bad about me. They must not like me. Therefore, we are having some type of quarrel essentially. So, yeah, it's gosh, conversations are hard though. Like just
Yeah,
thinking about that, I'm like, goodness, like
it's complex.
right, it really is. Like if you actually think about the connection between conveying language between another person, there's no guarantee. Like you could have great intentions on what you want to convey to them, but you also have to hope that they're dialed into like the right like radio signal that you're connecting to. Otherwise, it can completely be a miss, and therefore all sorts of miscommunication and struggles with kind of the aftermath.
That's why I always make the example of like somebody trying to learn a new language from a different culture. Like, learning the words alone are not enough because just because you say the words, you don't understand how saying the words with a certain inflection can mean something totally different in that culture than what you intended to mean. Or if you did it with a certain gesture, or if you did or did not do something with your body language, it can change the meaning. And oftentimes, when you're learning a new language with a new culture, you're not aware they're accidentally insulting people. And that's essentially the same thing with autism. Like, for example, a kid who's autistic might bluntly say, "Oh, your shirt looks weird." And that might not be because they're trying to be malicious. They're just expressing an honest opinion. And what gets confusing here is oftentimes growing up, most parents raise their children to be honest. It's in children's books, it's in church services, like everywhere your kid is taught, hey, honesty is a virtue, be honest. And so we're sending really mixed signals to our kids, especially our autistic kids who take things very literal. If we're teaching them these things, but then we get upset or punish them when they actually do it.
Right. I mean, just with the learning the new language, it reminded me um, of our honeymoon, of all things, where we went to England and Wales, and I was flipping people off left and right, and I didn't even realize it until probably like years later, because it was just the two of us. So anytime we'd go into a restaurant and they asked like, "Oh, how many are like in your party?" I would just hold up like a backwards like number two. I mean, I guess I could have held it like this, but I would just do like a backwards number two, which I've come to learn is essentially like giving like the middle finger to them. So hopefully they were just thinking like that is just a dumb
That's
American
an
who does not
American.
that he didn't realize he's just flipping me off. So, I mean, no disrespect to like England and Wales. That was a oversight on my part. But exactly, like because you weren't raised with you get in trouble for showing a certain hand gesture. Like, I mean, obviously it's the same thing in the United States. If you show your middle finger, you're going to get in trouble from a young age. So since we didn't have that in our culture, we were kind of oblivious to it until we actually saw some story or some little fun fact online, and then we realized like, oh, maybe that wasn't a good idea. But it's challenging because like unless you're actually doing kind of the homework to actually learn some of these techniques about language and you're really focused on them, you can easily communicate with someone and not even realize until way after the fact.
Yeah, and so you can see that autistic individuals, we're kind of a different culture in a sense. We speak a different language, we think a different way, we perceive the world differently. It really is like a different culture. So you have to give your kids some grace when it comes to that and try to put yourself in their shoes on what they're intending behind that bluntness. So it's important to keep that in mind, but also be able and willing to help them understand your world, understand why society thinks or believes that. And one of the things that you can do is helping them understand how the phrasing of their statement might make somebody else feel. So, what is the perception when you phrase something bluntly, like that shirt looks weird? Because it's not going to be intuitive to us. Like, for example, for me, I have a really hard time feeling insulted by other people. So, like, if somebody were to tell me that my shirt looks weird, I'd probably look at it and be like, oh, yeah, it kind of does. Or, oh, really? I didn't notice that. I would not remotely care if somebody said that. But it's hard for me to understand that other people would care. So sometimes I'm unintentionally rude to people because I make comments that to me, if they had said them to me, I would not be offended. But then I find out other people do get offended by it.
So, like, when I wear, like, a medium t-shirt and I am not a, like, medium husky kind of
Your
person,
baby
so
shirt?
right, right, so, like, like, I have, like, a couple of shirts from, like, gosh, high school and college, and they're, like, mediums, and I'm at best, what, like, a large in some cases, like, I've got, like,
At
extra large,
best.
large yeah, at best.
Yes.
So, like, sometimes, like, I'll put them on and I'll, like, walk out and, like, it is very revealing, and Leah just, like, looks at me and she's like, "That's not the shirt for you." So
I feel like I'm a little more blunt than that.
right, right, right. I mean, yeah, you're just like, yeah, you basically just say, "You're not a medium," and I have to live with
It's
the
so funny.
shame and guilt all by myself, yeah.
I say it's funny, but it's funny to me. It's probably not funny to you. But yeah,
I've
baby
accepted
shirt.
I've accepted it. I've accepted it.
So, here's a couple of things that you can try out with your kid to work on that skill. One of the things that you can do that we've mentioned before is role playing. So, setting up a scenario where they can practice rephrasing blunt statements. So, you can add them throughout your day. Basically, you could just do this ad hoc, or you can carve out some specific time of your day to do something like this. But what you could do is teach them to add what I call a cushion of kindness. So it's like softening the blow of what you're about to say, basically. So ask them to add that layer, add that cushion of kindness into the words of what they're saying, or to ask questions of that person rather than making definitive statements. So instead of saying something like, oh, that shirt looks weird, maybe say something like, huh, that's an interesting shirt. I haven't seen one like that. And again, you're going to have to work on their tone because if they say that tone in a cynical way, that could still insult the person. So you have to work on not just the phrasing of what they say, but also the tone. And what you can do is give them a variety of examples. Maybe say the same sentence three different ways and then practice with them. Okay, which one is sarcastic? Which one is happy? Which one is sad? And then help them try to develop identifying what these tone types sound like.
Hmm. That's a good idea. I was thinking of, like, more so, like, when our kids are, like, a little bit older, I would like to actually, like, watch, like, TV shows that deal with, I mean, just general struggles, or I mean, it could even be like a comedy, like, I always think of, like, The Office, mostly because, like, I'm positive, like, at least 2 characters pretty much are showing signs of autism. So you can kind of show like, oh, okay, did you see how Dwight said this to, I don't know, Pam or something? How do you think that was perceived by Pam? Do you think she could or is seeing it the same way that Dwight is? Or do you think that she's kind of seeing it in another context? So, I mean, obviously, like, because I mean, the show isn't really designed for 5-year-olds. I probably have to wait until, like, they're a little bit older, but I would like to actually, like, sit down and, like, watch some of these shows and kinda, like, talk through them, because, I mean, it's relatively obvious when you're watching a TV show if you're analyzing the characters, versus, like, sometimes, like, I mean, obviously, like, real life, it's a little bit harder because you are in the
Yeah.
situation, but, yeah, that's something I definitely wanna do, like, when our kids are a little bit older, just to kind of reinforce some of the, like, techniques that we've been working on with them.
Yeah, but that's a good place to start because like you mentioned, it is harder applying it. So for me, it's easy for me to see it on TV and be able to identify it, but it's harder for me to identify it in my own life. So that's a good place to start if your kid struggles with even that level. Start off with identifying it in scenarios you're watching and then slowly apply it to your own scenarios that you're practicing. I know for me, one of the areas in my life where this has kind of come into play has been in my written communication. So with my verbal communication, I struggle more in catching it. I kind of catch it after the fact and then have to backtrack. But when it comes to like written format, especially now with the advent of AI, that's something that has actually really helped me be able to work out the kinks in my tone and my language. So one of the things that I've done is, for example, if I'm responding to an email, I will draft out my email and 100% of the time, not 99%, 100% of the time, my first draft of an email is very honest and blunt. And in the past, I didn't identify that because I didn't realize I was autistic. So I would send those emails and then obviously it wouldn't work out great. But I have since learned that I am autistic and I struggle with that. So what I do now is manually either go back and add in some niceties. So for instance, somebody will be like, "Hey, can you do this?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, I could do that. Bye." But now I'm like, "Oh, hi, Susie. How are you doing? Yeah, no problem. I could do that. Hope you're doing well. Talk to you later." So, like, I have to manually add these niceties in that are expected and soften that blow. So that's adding that cushion of kindness. But AI can do that for you now. So if you don't think of this on your own, you could just copy paste your text into AI and add a prompt that says, "Make this sound nicer," basically. And then AI will edit it for me. So that's actually a really good use of AI, I think, for autistic individuals.
Have you noticed when you've been doing that, that you're picking up, like, common themes or, like, common phrases to kind of, like, soften your emails? So, like, essentially, like, I mean, o obviously, like, AI, I
Yeah.
mean, is used, like, as, like, an assistant, but in, like, if you weren't to use AI, have you started to pick up, like, enough, like, little, like, phrases or, like, s
I use the same one. It's always, "Hey, hope all is well." Like, it's like
okay, but
basically
even so, that
very generic.
sure. But I mean, it's good that because you've used that as like an assistant tool, you've kind of learned, okay, it's very repetitive to get like the pleasantries in an email. So, I mean, obviously you can, I mean, still use it. I mean, by all means, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying you are benefiting from using the AI because you are slowly picking up, oh, okay, I can phrase it kind of like this and it sounds softer than like what I would have originally put together. So it is beneficial like in the end because you are like gaining additional skills.
Mhm. So one of the things that I've had to train myself is essentially to pause, think, then react because I tend to just jump to react and that's when it all comes out blunt like word vomit. And having to force myself to mentally pause, think it through, think about how might they perceive what I'm going to say before I say it and then react. That is in itself an improvement that I'm able to do that now. However, the problem with that is it adds processing time. And that's something that neurotypicals don't understand. If your child is kind of staring at you blankly and you feel like it's taking them a long time to respond to what you're saying, sometimes it's because of that extra processing time that we have to do that neurotypicals don't have to do. So if you want us to be more polite, if you want us to be more sociable and do all these things that are quote unquote more appropriate, you're going to have to be okay with the fact that it's going to take us more processing time to respond to you. So just keep that in mind. And again, give grace.
And you raised a good point. I mean, I'm happy that you actually use the word pause in kind of breaking down like your thought structure because like that's even one of the techniques that our oldest daughter is learning in play therapy is because since she's in school, she likes to kind of blurt out the answer or other things, even though she's not being called on. So we've been working with, if we notice that she's starting to like say an answer when we're trying to work with her younger sister on homework, we kind of will say like pause and then kind of have like her settle down for a second. And then we remind her like, oh, okay, we're working with your younger sister on this. But then we give her a chance to answer questions as well, but she's starting to kind of see, oh, okay, I didn't realize I need to like hold my answers in and give someone else a chance to answer. So it's good that you mentioned that because like that's a skill that we're doing a very basic version of for our oldest daughter.
Yeah, and it's a little harder when it comes to honesty because younger kids have a harder time with that sort of concept. But it's something that you can practice with, is really making that conscious effort to pause before react. And what that does is it gives your kids some time to process the scenario, what's going on, and be able to pull in the social cues that they're getting. So, body language, tone, all that stuff. It gives them some time to pull that information in, process it before they react and give their answer. One of the things that you can also do is encourage them to look into those signals. So, for instance, if somebody is folding their arms after they blurted something out, you can teach them to at least verbalize, hey, I can tell by your folded arms that what I said upset you. And then try to make amends. I didn't mean to. Let me try again. And that phrase of like, let me try again is something that we've also learned from the play therapist with our child. It's giving them like an opportunity for a redo so they don't feel trapped or stuck or like they did a wrong that they can't correct. By giving them the power of saying, hey, I acknowledge I did this thing. Let me try again. You, as the parent or as society, should then step in and be like, yeah, of course, here's your opportunity, and not get offended or hurt immediately. Like, let them try to make amends because that's their way of trying.
That's the hard thing about language too, because like once you've said something, you can't unsay something. So it's like you can like if you say something wrong the first time, like you can slap a band-aid on it and be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it that way." But once it's said, and then it's just like trying to like repair. So like I
Yeah.
mean, but and essentially that is kind of like a reset of sorts because like they can see I mean, I'm hoping the person that you would be having the conversation with, they would see like, "Oh, okay, they genuinely must have misspoke and they want to try and like undo that conversation." But I agree it is very difficult, just given the context of just language in general.
And that's why I'm so passionate about intent because I feel like it's wrong to get upset with somebody if they say something that hurt you unintentionally. I think intent is really what you should be upset with if there was the intention to hurt you. And so that's something that we as society can do on our part is be empathetic and understanding of the autistic struggle and have patience with this learning process because it can be lifelong for many of us. I know for me, like I have improved, but I 100% still have those issues. And Matt could tell you it's written all over his face if you're watching the video live stream. Trust me, it is a lifelong struggle, but you can improve it.
Yes, I will plead the fifth on that one.
Smart
No,
husband.
I know. No, no, no. I mean, it's I mean, obviously, like, and I mean, I misspeak too, or like, I'll say things I don't necessarily mean, or like, we will have miscommunications all the time because I'll perceive something that you've said incorrectly from what you're actually saying, just based on my own struggles and challenges. So I mean, it's an ongoing challenge, and I mean, and we've been married for years, so eight,
I don't know.
nine,
Who knows?
8, I think
Yeah.
8. So
Yeah. So that's definitely something that's totally relatable in our lives and something that I feel like many parents can relate to. But there are, again, a lot of these tools that you can do to try to address this. Another one that comes to mind is teaching the concept of perspective taking. That's something that autistic people also struggle with. So, helping your child understand that another person, another individual might think and feel differently than you. And that's something that is kind of an abstract concept that again is a little wonky and difficult to treat or difficult to teach. It can be a little tricky. And that is something that I feel we have struggled a lot with our kids. It's a complication of both their age too because they're still young and it's natural at a young age to not really understand that either. But with autism in particular, it's hard to help individuals understand how to put themselves in other people's shoes. It's something that can be taught with practice, but again, even me as an adult, it's something that I have to like consciously make an effort to do because it doesn't come naturally to me.
well, it's kind of like as far as like empathy, right? Is that what you're kind of going along with?
Like putting yourself in another person's perspective. For
Right.
instance, if I say, I don't understand why that upsets that person because if that happened to me, it wouldn't upset me. Therefore, I think you're being dramatic. So, like that sort of reaction where that person, instead of wanting somebody to say they're being dramatic, would want somebody to be like, oh, are you okay? And be empathetic. And that's really, really hard, even as autistic adults, to do when you feel like that person is overreacting to something, for example.
And I mean, honestly, I mean, and I mean, you say as far as like that that's a challenge for autistics, but also like even neurotypicals, like we don't get it great all the time. I mean, there's plenty of people who struggle as far as like with an empathy component. It's not something that it's either black or white. You either have it or you don't. I mean, it can be anything from if you didn't get a lot of sleep last night, your empathy is basically gone. So, like, if Susie's complaining that like they messed up her drink at Starbucks or whatever, you're kind of like, yeah, that's terrible. Like you really don't care because like you've got your own challenges and struggles. So like I mean it's hard because you're trying to learn something that is not always going to be the same across the board. Like sometimes you have empathy and then sometimes you don't depending on your circumstances.
Yeah, so some of the things that you can do in that area is try to make it more relatable. And one of the ways that you can do that is by incorporating what they are interested in, like maybe their special interest. So, for example, if they can't understand why a kid was upset when they took their hat, you could be like, okay, my kid's special interest is rubber ducks. How would you feel if somebody took your rubber duck and like focus specifically on the thing that they are really passionate about, that they do care about, and see if that works for them? Or, for example, using social scripts. So you can give them like these rehearsed phrases that they can practice with in different situations. And that gives them another tool that they can work with during these interactions that they might not naturally have. So, for instance, if they don't like food, instead of being blunt and direct and be like, that's disgusting. Obviously, that's rude. You don't want them to say that to your friend when she invites you over to dinner if they don't like the food. So instead, if they offer them food that they don't like, just giving them options of other phrases that are more acceptable, like, oh, it's not my favorite, or I don't really care for it, but thank you. And it's still honest, right? So that's the joy and awesomeness of these phrases is you're picking things where they still feel true to themselves. They're being honest, but they're doing it in a more acceptable way. And I want to emphasize that being honest and keeping them honest is key because I can't tell you as an autistic person, like, it really creates cognitive dissonance. Like, it really frustrates you if you feel like you have to lie. Like, it's really something that is extremely grating to an autistic person.
And that is one of the things that I do appreciate about like our kids. Like if they do like make a mistake and they are doing something wrong at like school and we ask them like, oh, okay, like what happened? Like they'll actually tell us like what happened. And obviously for whatever reason, when they do get in trouble, it is because of something that they've done. So like more recently, honestly, I think it was today. Like our oldest had been throwing her food in like the cafeteria, for example. So when we asked her like, "Oh, like what happened like in the cafeteria?" She said like, "Oh, I threw my food." Like very straightforward, like not trying to say, "Well, one of the kids," da, 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 and then trying to like sugarcoat what her action was. She's very straightforward. I threw my food. Obviously, we weren't able to get all the context as to why, but she had no problem being straightforward and honest and telling us exactly what her actions were about the situation.
Yeah. And that's a positive note that I want to end on is that they are being honest, right? So there's some perks that come with that. And there's a silver lining to this cloud, which is that you will get the honest truth. And that's something that I've appreciated with our girls is whenever they are doing something they're not supposed to do, I can rely on asking them, did you do X, Y, and Z? And they'll be like, yep. Okay, how did you do that? Where did you get this from? Over here. What exactly did you do? I opened it up, ripped it out, da 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 da. Like they tell me verbatim exactly what they did and how because of that kind of like urge to be honest. So that is something that can actually be a positive in that, at least for us and our situation, I don't know if it's our genetic honesty line, but we are the types of autistic that it really bothers us to not tell the truth. So that is something that I think is beneficial and that silver lining.
That's true. And then the challenge of like a punishment because you're like, well, you did tell the truth, so it'll be like lesser of like a punishment. So you're like trying to like walk the line of like, like, okay, you did
They're
something
actually
like,
just playing 4D chess to try to get
I
out of
know, and I'm
punishment.
like, oh my gosh, okay, you did something bad, but you told the truth about it. So like, I can't be like so upset because honesty is so important nowadays. So it's kind of like where to kind of fall with like the parenting, but that's, I guess, part of the fun struggle of the day.
Yes. So again,
Mm.
I think that we should, as a society, work with our neurotypical peers to help create an atmosphere of inclusion where we're helping like prompt our kids for the proper phrases, conduct, etc. But at the same time, we want society to remember and consider our kids' intent and not just the literal words that they're speaking. That is so critically important. And again, remember, we're not asking our kids to hide their honesty. We want to be able to give them the tools to deliver that honesty with empathy, not hide it. And that way they continue to be honest. And that is something that we appreciate. That's something that is beautiful part of who they are. And this is something that might actually help them in life as they develop as functioning adults. Hopefully, that is the goal for every parent. But they'll also learn how to communicate in ways that won't cause unnecessary harm or damage or put them into situations that could ultimately end up being dangerous. So, to all the parents out there, I just want to basically wrap this up with saying practice patience with your child. Make sure you're celebrating the honesty. So, like, if they do tell you the truth, and like the situation we said where, hey, they broke something and they told us, celebrate that honesty and teach them to use it tactfully. That is an appropriate place to use it. That is an appropriate way to phrase it. Praise them when they do it correctly. But like anything in autism, it's a journey. It's going to take time. And being consistent and supportive is really part of that. Helping them navigate these situations is part of that. Helping them develop confidence to be able to continue to try is a part of that. And remembering that this is just another step in helping them thrive in a world that's not really made for them.
Well said.
Was that a bit much?
That was, I mean, that was, I feel like kind of like the, I don't know, the talk show, like, I don't know, your like Oprah moment where they kind of like, like sit down at the end and they kind of give you like a nice little
You
like,
get empathy. You get empathy. Everyone gets empathy.
well, that too. But as far as like a nice like recap of like how we can like push forward and be our best. I like it.
Exactly. So, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. But before we go, I'd like to know, how does your child's honesty show up in their daily interactions? What strategies have you tried to help them express themselves with kindness? We'd really love to hear your experiences and your tips for what's worked. So make sure to join the conversation in the Embracing Autism community, or you can leave us a comment on YouTube and Facebook at Autism Wish. Also, don't forget to become a member today. You can connect with us and other parents and also access exclusive resources. That's it. That's all I got. What do you got? Nothing else?
No,
We
it's
good?
good. I liked it.
All
Yeah.
right. I'll
All
see
right.
y'all later
Until next
next
time.
week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.